Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Cash That. This is your host, Joe Dellera, and it is a wonderful night in the association. We're a couple weeks into the season, and we've been kind of getting into a good groove. Over the past couple of weeks, we've been really cashing, and I'm very happy about the results that we've had over the past couple of weeks. But today in particular, I'm very happy because I was able to get a bet out to the huddle, and then I actually wound up sharing that one for free through the Action app or Action Network app as well. So if you follow me there, I do post my picks there. You get the notifications. They're free. You're generally going to be getting them with a little bit more juice than where I posted it originally in the huddle. And that does matter. And I'm going to touch on that in a little bit, but was able to give out Isaiah Collier double. And we were actually able to hit on this a couple different ways. And I was very, very happy about it. So one of the ways that we hit this was 10 points and 9 assists, which was really just like a stupid line in the grand scheme of things here, because we had here 10 and 9 at 32-1. And I actually got to give a hat tip. And it's one of the things that I like about being in the huddle. It's a community, and people are always kind of shopping too. And I do my best to shop for everything. Caesars actually didn't have a 10 and 10, and they didn't have a double, but somebody went over there, they checked, and you could get 10 and 9 at 32-1, which was interesting because the best price that I was able to find was on FanDuel, and it was actually for plus 2,200, plus 2,254. And that was for 10 points and 10 assists. So it required an extra stat, and it wasn't as good of a price. So was really happy to be able to cash these, was really happy to be able to give them out for free in the community. But I do think it's helpful, if you're able to get in there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys you can get a week for $1 in the bio down here of this show. So whether you're watching on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, I do try to drop some bangers in here, especially with some more extensive analysis about what we are looking at, what we're not looking at. But there's a lot more community. There's a lot more chatter, or so to speak, in the Discord, in the huddle. So really recommend it for you guys. And for $1 for a week, give it a shot. See how it goes for you. But as you guys know, this type of bet in particular, I am not somebody that is going out there and, the people that have followed me forever, like I might degenerately bet a couple things for myself, which helps a little bit in terms of, let's say, like account health, right? Like just throw a couple things in your home team, whatever. But I'm not somebody that goes out and bets like a ton of parlays. It's not the way I bet. I mostly bet straights, and they're calculated risks here. So like this one, calculated decision, back to back. I was like, this line just seems out of whack, so I'm gonna jump all over it. And I thought that was pretty important here. So really nice bet, really nice way to kind of kick off the week here. And we've got a monstrous slate on Wednesday. So I'm going to talk about a couple different things. I'm going to talk through a couple different tools, and I'm going to talk at the end of the show. There was a conversation that I saw on Twitter or X today that I wanted to give a couple of my thoughts on. Some really well-respected people in the community were talking about CLV and what exactly that means. And the two people that I was kind of looking at in particular were Blaze Bets, really sharp, really smart, kind of all over this, and Pips NBA. I'm actually going to be talking and showing you guys one of the tools that he uses as well, and he created really on this show. So definitely something to kind of keep an eye on. Two really good people to follow, and I think that it was something that I wanted to add a little bit in terms of the conversation. So I'll give some best bets, and I'm going to come back to the CLV conversation a little bit later in the show. But off the rip, let's start talking about this slate. And again, monstrous slate, and a lot of different things in terms of the injury report. And I wanted to talk about the NBA injury report overall, because there's a couple different tools that I think are important, that you should be able to use for determining who like is hurt or who isn't hurt. So one of the things that I think is important is, and I think is a little bit easier to see. And I'm actually going to show you guys. So one of the things that I'm trying to do now with the YouTube show is to differentiate it a little bit. Obviously, if you're listening, that's great. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple, Overcast, I love Overcast. Shout out Brandon and Jim for getting me on that. But one of the things that I think is, if you're here on YouTube, if you're watching, I want to be able to differentiate it for you guys besides just looking at me. We're not like the ugliest people here, but like let's show you guys some other things besides just my face, right? So that's what we're going to start doing. And one of the things here that I like to look at, and what I like to check in anyway, is obviously I think ESPN is really good, I think, for number one, not for negotiating with YouTube, because god damn it, like, let's get this. Also, like, really showed them, like, the whole thing was squawking about Monday Night Football, and what a barn burner of a game between the Eagles and the Packers that we really missed out on. What a shame. What a shame. But anyway, I like their injury report. I think it's easy to read. I think it's easy to go down and make sure, different players are in, different players are out, sorted by team, pretty intuitive. I like the estimated return date part. And, there's like the brief comment. But realistically, the one that's best and the one that you should be looking at, obviously, I think you need to follow some of the injury reporting Twitter accounts. Beat reporters are best, but it's hard to have that many different tweet notifications on. But the injury report, I think, is the best from the NBA directly. And this report updates often. So, like, if you look at, you can look at this for today anyway. The first one's up at 12:30 Eastern time. And it looks like this. It's not as clear. It's not as intuitive. It doesn't have the same dates in terms of, when players are expected back. The part that is good about this is it does break it down by matchup. So you can see for each matchup who's in, who's out, what are their status, and like a brief reason why. So here, for example, the first one that we're looking at is it's got the game date, it has the game time, the matchup, the teams, and then it goes down and it lists everybody for the Chicago Bulls and the Detroit Pistons. And I think this is important because you can see like a little bit of a discrepancy between ESPN's and this one. It's nothing like crazy, right? But if you looked at the Bulls, for example, you see Josh Giddey, Kobe White, Zach Collins. If you look at this one from the NBA, a lot more players. Zach Collins, Noah Segway, Trenton Flowers, Josh Giddey, Emmanuel Miller, Lacan Olbrich, and Kobe White. A lot of this is G League assignments, and it's the reason why they're out. But I do think it gives you a little bit more context, a little bit more information about all of the players that are on this team, all the players that are on these rosters. And then even if you look down at the Detroit Pistons, for Detroit on ESPN, they have Collier, Stewart, Asar, Duran, Tobias, Sasser, and Ivy. And they more or less have the same thing here for Detroit. They're not dealing with anybody in the G League. You're not looking at anything else, but you do see a difference in terms of what the severity of the injury is. So for Tobias Harris, for example, it has him as out on NBA, out, injury, illness, right ankle sprain. Whereas on the on ESPN, they've got out November 10. So there's a note about when the comment came from. Number 10, head coach JB Bickerstaff said that Harris has already been ruled out for Monday's game against the Wizards, trending in the right direction, but remains without a timetable for return, and then credits who the reporter was that they got that information was. And it has an estimated return date of November 24th. This is also helpful for trying to figure out who some of these beat writers are, who are the people that are reporting this information. If you want to go look for them on X, put their notifications on, you might get a little bit better information moving forward that you can actually use that's actually actionable. So I do think that there's value in both, and they should be handled a little bit differently. And I think that that's an important tool. So one of the things that I wanted to go into, say, for this matchup anyway, so we got Bulls Pistons, and you have Giddey is questionable, Cade is questionable, Asar is out, Tobias is out, Isaiah Stewart, I would say he's going to be out. He's listed as doubtful. So I would kind of couch that as that he's not going to play. My guess is that both Cade and Giddey are going to play. I think that this is an important game divisionally. I know it's early in the season, but I do think it's an important spot. One of the things that I was looking at was Cade RA. I thought that might be a good spot for him in this matchup without Asar Thompson. His line's at 14.5. There's something that I'm kind of monitoring. Cade is questionable with that hip injury. Took an absolutely insane amount of shots last time out there. So we shall see if he is able to do that again. But that was something that I'm looking at. Not 100% sure if I'm going to pull the trigger, but just something that I'm kind of keeping an eye on. The next game, and I'm going to keep it fast for some of these games. There might not be a play, but I will at least go through some of the injuries. Bucks, Hornets, LaMelo's out. That's questionable, since probable. Nothing here yet, but I mean, like Giannis has been insane. So, and Miles Bridges got upgraded, so that's also notable for this game. In terms of the Magic versus the Knicks, I think that this is an interesting game. Mitchell Robinson sat out last night or tonight against who do we play? Against the Memphis Grizzlies. And I thought it was interesting for a couple different reasons. And it was interesting that they decided to sit Mitch against Memphis when presumably that was the easier game. And the reason I say that is most of the time I was kind of having this conversation yesterday with Matt Moore, and teams now they basically look at these games and they say, what is the most optimal situation here? Because we want to raise our win percentage the highest and deal with it there and guarantee the win. So in this instance, the Knicks were 10-point favorites against the Grizzlies. They're about 4-point favorites over the Orlando Magic. The thought process there is if Mitch plays, that helps them win the game that they are more certain that they are going to win in the first place, which is against the Grizzlies compared to the Orlando Magic. It seems like New York said, well, we might be able to win that game anyway. We'd rather play them against Orlando because we think this game might be important for seeding. We think it might be important for like conference rivalry, tiebreakers, whatever. We want to try in this game a little bit more. The counterpoint is, does New York now on the back-to-back, do they sit anybody else? Like, does Cat now sit against Orlando? Because maybe Orlando is closer to a coin flip game, and you say, well, we'd rather Cat go against Memphis, and then we still want to have somebody to throw out there against Orlando, but we don't think we need both against Memphis. We'll keep Mitch for this game against Orlando. I don't really think that's the case. I think that we're going to see them generally all play, and that the idea was we'll hold Mitch out against Memphis. We're going to play him against Orlando because we think that this game is important. So that was one of the things that I was kind of keeping an eye on. So with that being said, Mitch rebounds obviously would be a decent look here. He's been an absolute monster. I do think that it's a good Paolo spot for Orlando. I am a little hesitant to go at that without knowing for sure what New York is going to do defensively. But I do think that it's a good Paolo spot. I'd probably be looking at his points if I was wanting to bet something from a Orlando perspective. Looking at the Grizzlies versus the Celtics, both teams on a back-to-back. One player that it's notable is that Zach Edey may be close to returning here. If Edey comes back, this is a really good matchup for him. Boston does not have a great big. I think Keita is very good for what he is, but it could be a really good spot for Edey to bounce back. I don't know what his lines are going to be looking like. I don't know what his minutes restriction is going to be looking like. I'd imagine maybe like 20 minutes, but if we can get a rebound line of, I don't know, like anything under 10, I'd probably be interested in it. And especially against the Celtics team who just doesn't have that type of rebounder to kind of keep him out there. So definitely something I was looking at there. I'd also be looking at, Brunson just cooked Memphis. I think that Jaylen Brown, had a rough start to the game today against the Philadelphia 76ers. He could definitely bounce back in the spot against Memphis. Jalen Wells does a pretty good job, as good of a job as he can defensively, but I do think that Boston moves the ball well enough that Jaylen Brown would be able to kind of score on him. Jaylen Brown's also a little bit bigger. They might deploy Wells on, Derek White, Peyton Pritchard, somebody like that. Now, I want to talk about this next game, and the next game is the Cavaliers versus the Heat. And I'm going to bring up one of the tools that I've been using now, and I kind of referenced this a little bit earlier. And it is Pip's tool and is called Props Madness. And I really like this tool. I think it's really well made. I think it's really well done. I'm looking right here. Part of why I actually really like it is if you look here on the left-hand side, it tells you if there are no props up for like a particular game, which I think is really, really great. So, you can sort by game, you can look, you can see what props are available, what lines are up there, and there's a little bit more like underlying data as well. So I think that's really, really useful, really helpful. And I think it just makes, it's a nice experience, honestly. So, for me, I was looking here in this game for the Cavs and the Heat, and a major reason why I was looking at this game is it's littered with injuries. We got no Mobley, no Donovan Mitchell, no Darius Garland. Bam Adebayo is also out for Miami, and these teams just played like the other day in an overtime game. So I would imagine that we see DeAndre Hunter gets a good amount of run. I would imagine that Tyson will also get a good amount of burn. And Allen, it was interesting because Allen is not on the injury report. They haven't been saying that he's not going to play or anything like that. Um, they but last game he only played 21 minutes. So I don't know what his minutes rotation is going to necessarily look like. And I think that is actually really good for a couple different players. One of which is Jaime Jaquez, who I got brought up here, and he just had 42 PRA in 33 minutes. And if we look, I like here because you can go by seasons. So you can look at, this season, whatever. I like looking at this season. And you can see, like, when you hover over this, you can see like what some of the underlying data is. So like I've been enjoying it. But anyway, he just had against Cleveland, he just had 42 PRA, 22 points, 13 rebounds on 24 chances, so a lot of chances, and 7 dimes on 10 potential assists. So this line admittedly is a little bit higher than where we've been betting Jaime Jaquez, but he's been really, really solid for Miami this season, averaging 30.3 PRA this season. And I just think it's a good spot for him against this Cleveland team who is pretty significantly banged up. I think that he is somebody that can get into the interior without Mobley, especially. This is going to be a good look for him. They just don't have the proper size to kind of contain him. And I think that the way that Miami wants to play, especially with some of these injuries that Cleveland is dealing with, is going to make it a little bit easier for him to facilitate. Plus, you can see some of these other players that have been similar, so to speak. You can see how they performed against Cleveland as well. So that was one of the looks. And then Kel'el Ware had 20 rebounds, which is wild, on 25 chances though. So the conversion rate, I think, was particularly high for him. And this was an overtime game, played 32 minutes, but which has been like, he's been a little bit all over the place in terms of his minutes. That was clearly the high that he's had. So 10 and a half rebounds, not totally crazy, but he is only averaging 8.8. You can see, though, without Bam Adebayo, he's doing a little bit better on this number. 6 rebounds, 12 rebounds, 20 rebounds so far this season. And then honestly, if we looked at the last two, averaging 7.5 overall, but then 11.6 in these scenarios without Bam Adebayo. So something to kind of consider. I don't mind either of those looks. And, Norman Powell also scored 33 points, was really, really good. And points props at 22.5 again. Just, I think it's a little bit more likely to be a bit of a lopsided game. So I do wonder if Norm is a guy where a little bit older, maybe he doesn't play as much if the game kind of gets out of hand one way or the other. So just something that I was kind of looking at and that I was kind of considering here. Now, one of the other tools that I've been kind of toying with and playing around with has been this app called the Hall of Fame app. And the game that I'm going to talk about next is the Warriors versus the Spurs. So this is a back-to-back for Golden State. They did have Steph Curry on the injury report. He did play. Al Horford did sit against the Thunder. Absolutely, they got shellacked. Oklahoma City, now he sat against Oklahoma City. So I would imagine that he plays here in this game. The prop that I'm looking at and that I really wanted to target was De'Aaron Fox over 19.5 points. To me, I just think this line is, again, too low. And he didn't really get to play against Golden State last season, but prior to that, he'd been performing really well. But even regardless of that, one of the things that I was looking at here is if you look at this website here, you can see what the overall Golden State defense is. It's solid. They're 11th here against points, 11th in terms of rebounds, 10th in terms of assists. But against point guards in particular, they're just getting fried for points, rebounds, and assists. And I like the idea of targeting De'Aaron Fox's points. So just came back, and one of the things that I liked here was that you can see, what his game log is. You can see what the average is on the top. You can add a couple filters here on the side from here, whether, who's playing, home games, regular season, minutes, win, loss, and it has some different grading for some of the players. So I'll get into that another day. But here, 24 points, 21 points. And what I liked about the minutes is that he played 31 and basically 37 minutes in these last two games. The dude really did mean it when he said, Like, I'm coming back with the idea that, like, I waited extra time to be fully ready to return. And now I'm just ready to hit the ground running. And I do think that San Antonio really needed a player like De'Aaron Fox to excel in this type of scenario. And you can also see what I liked here is you can see some of these recent stat lines against Golden State, and it's updated already. So, Shea just played 28 points against them, and that game was earlier today, or earlier yesterday rather. You can sort it by position. You can see like what the high point totals were in really each game against them, and you're seeing a lot of point guards here, like Shea, Devin Booker, Ryan Rollins played great, James Harden, John Morant, Luka, obviously. You can see some of these high scoring performances. A lot of them are point guards against this Golden State Warriors team. So you can check what the props are. You can see what the lines are. You can see what the hit rates are, obviously. I like that you can show some of the implied odds of, what they did like maybe last season. And, you can move this, you can move the total up or down, whatever you want it to do. So just a couple different things there. There's a lot more tools in here. I'm sure we'll be talking about them in the future, but did just want to show you guys a little bit of that before we kind of got down to a little bit further in the best bets. So let's dive over into this now. So for me, for that game, I'm going to be looking at De'Aaron Fox over 19.5 points. So another game that I'm looking at is Wizards versus Rockets. This game should honestly be a blowout, but Bilal Coulibaly is out. I do think this is a good spot for Alperen Şengün. I'm grabbing over 31.5 points plus rebounds. I know there's blowout risk. It is what it is. Matchup's too good. It's a plus matchup for him. I think that this is just a line that I'm going to have to take, and I'll roll with the punches. I do think that one of the things that helps a little bit with this is that Şengün, younger guy, I think that he wants to get some of these stats up there for a variety of different reasons, whether it's all-star, most improved, all NBA, etc. But also some of the guys on the team are just like a little bit older. So, when you look at it, you go, well, Brant in a blowout, sure, not going to play. Steven Adams in particular in a blowout, not going to play. And you start getting further down the list, and it's like, well, like maybe Şengün kind of like needs to get out. Like they need some minutes out of him just to even get you there in a blowout. So, he's somebody that I'm looking at. And then Keshawn George on the Wizards I'm looking at for either points or threes. And I think that he would get the burn regardless of whether it's a blowout win or a loss. But Houston has been giving up a lot of threes in terms of frequency, and Keshawn George takes a good amount of threes. So I'm debating with the points or the threes, but I do think that either is a decent look in this game against the Rockets. I'll probably have a play on that, and I'll release it through the huddle a little bit later. Next game, Blazers versus Pelicans. No Zion, no Jordan Poole. Derek Queen over PRA. I think it's been a really good spot for bigs against the Blazers, actually. Klingon, as good as he is, not the most like nimble. So, and you generally just have to play a big against the Blazers. So Derek Queen's been really good to start the year. Definitely a look for me. It's probably going to be around like 18.5, 19.5. That'll be good for me. Looking at the Suns versus the Mavericks, Derek Lively is questionable. Anthony Davis is questionable as well. Obviously, no Jalen Green moving forward for the Phoenix Suns. And they fired Nico Harrison. So it would be so fitting if Anthony Davis actually gets into this game, plays pretty well, over 32.5 points plus rebounds. I think it's just a smack. I don't think that he plays if he is not healthy. He said this in 4 of 4 games when he's playing normal minutes. I just don't think he plays if he's not healthy. And this matchup has been smack city for AD against Mark Williams. I think he had like 60 points plus rebounds against him last year. So really, really good spot. 32.5. I mean, AD can go over that on points alone. And, he does have ceiling in both scoring and in rebounds. So 32.5, great number for me. Lakers versus the Thunder, back-to-back for OKC. LeBron's probably back next week or so, but looking at the Thunder, Dort, Wiggins, J-Dub still hasn't debuted yet, but they all sat versus Golden State. I do wonder if they all make a return against the Lakers. Dort has been an absolute fucking menace for Luka. And as good as Luka is, as good as he's been, Dort has really slowed him down. And I think in part, it's just stylistically the way that Luka plays. He's not like the fastest dude. And Dort, not the fast guy either, but so just so fucking strong. And I think that matters for this particular matchup. And I think that's part of why Dort has been able to slow him down. But so just kind of keeping an eye on that. I got nothing for Hawks versus Kings. It's a back-to-back for the Kings. You do wonder if they sit anybody, especially as there's been some reporting about the team wanting to kind of tear it down. So have to see that. And then Nuggets versus Clippers. It's a back-to-back for Denver. You have to wonder, because Murray and Gordon were on the report for this game against the Sacramento Kings. Do wonder if they sit. Bradley Beal, Kawhi Leonard, both out for the Clippers. James Harden made some comments today about basically saying that the team has no continuity. There's been players in and out. The rotations make no sense. I don't know if that means that Harden is going to be good or if he's going to be bad. And it just does speak to a level of unrest in this Clippers organization. And I'm sure it's frustrating to be him, where, when you actually heard some of the commentary about why he wanted to leave Brooklyn, a lot of it had to do with these very same reasons. Players in and out, players that weren't necessarily taking things as seriously as others, don't love the vibes there in LA right now for the Clippers. So interesting spot. Would be probably another good Jokic game against, even though it's against Zoo, and Zoo has been really solid. I do think I would be looking for, maybe some rebounds, maybe some assists against the Clippers. And then, we have a really stupid 3-game slate on Thursday, and then NBA Cup games again on Friday. So a lot of games, a lot of opportunity, and very excited to kind of dive into more of the games this week and send out some more best bets on this massive Wednesday slate. But now I want to turn us into something a little bit different. All right, so this is kind of what I want to talk about in terms of CLV. For those of you that don't know, CLV is called closing line value, and it basically deals with the idea of when you bet something, are you beating the line or are you not beating the line? And what that means is basically, let's say I bet over 19 and a half points on De'Aaron Fox, and I bet it at even money. So that's plus 100. And by the time the game tips off, it is minus 150 for over 19 and a half points. That means I got closing line value. When I made the bet compared to where it closed, was in my favor. You can also have it the other way, where let's say I bet De'Aaron Fox over 19 and a half points at even money, and that wound up moving to plus 110. For whatever reason, it moved to plus 110. A lot of it has to do with some part of what I'll talk about in a second here. But I thought it kind of introduced a little bit of an interesting conversation here on X. And I'm going to show you what I kind of saw here. Looking here, A1 Fantasy Sports, also good guy, good follow. Imagine if CLV actually mattered for NBA player props 2025, we would all be rich. WizBet says CLV is 100% the most overrated aspect of betting. In only 5 to 10% of cases, good CLV equals sharp read, and the books made an error. Most of the time, it's because there's tons of volume on one side of the bet. Learning this has been my biggest growth as a capper / educating young gamblers. A couple things to unpack there. I'm going to read the rest of these comments and then I'm going to give my thoughts. So then Pips says, I don't really, basically he says, I don't really agree. There's a ton of volume on one side and the line moving, creating CLV means sharp bettors think that there's value there. That's literally why it moves. If a tout releases fake artificial line movement, sharp bettors will hammer the other side and correct the market. So the tout ends up not even getting the CLV. Basically, sportsbooks are wrong 99% of the time. They rely on sharp action to shape their lines. Opening numbers are soft and closing lines are sharp because sharp money moves them to where they should be. If you're betting on better numbers early, getting CLV, you're going to profit long term. You generally are going to want CLV. Wiz kind of responds back about this, and there's a little bit of conversation. I'm just going to kind of get to my point. And then Blaze, what I liked here, I think this is probably one of the most important parts of this conversation, is that a lot of people kind of overestimate the value that they're getting. And he essentially says, if you get a line of plus 100, your chances of winning are 50%. And if that line moves to minus 150, your odds are 60%. If it moves minus 200, your odds are 67%. And a lot of new bettors don't realize that if you take a minus 200 3 times, you're expected to lose a third of the time. It sounds basic, but a lot of people don't really understand that. So a lot of people see plus 100 to minus 200 and they think it's going to win 90% of the time. I think that it actually captures this decently well. Pips agrees, and WizBets kind of talks about the odds, the fact that just because you get positive CLV doesn't exponentially increase your odds of cashing. I want to unpack this in a couple different ways. And one of the things that I think is important for people to understand is the first thing that he said. I bring up this betting odds calculator from the Action Network. I'm going to make this bigger so it's easier to see. Essentially, let's say you bet $100 on something, and the odds of this are we'll start with even money. There's different ways that this can be determined. So I like to use American odds. Most people in America use American odds. There's decimal odds, fractional odds, and then the implied odds. Decimal odds are most important for if you're talking or trying to figure out dead heat. That's a totally different conversation. I'm not going to do that now. It's a good amount of math that's we just don't need to get into right now. But you see here, the implied odds are 50%. Now, minus 110, which is most bets, although honestly now most props are like minus 115. So let's do that. I'm sorry, did it in the wrong spot. Minus 115. The implied odds are 53.49%. And this is why when you say there's a couple different things that go into this. If you're only betting minus 115 odds, like everything you bet's minus 115, you need to win more than 53.5% of the time in order to be profitable long term. That's not even getting into the taxes of it, right? That's what you need to do. That's how you have to beat the market. And I think it's important for people to understand even that, because like when you bet something, the books put these lines out there. And let's say it's an over and under, and they're putting minus 115 on both sides. The book, it's not one of those situations where they need to be right like more often than you or so to speak. They don't even need to be right as often as you. They just need you to not be right 53.5% of the time, and they're making money. Because they basically have a plus 115 on the same situation that you have a minus 115. And that's like a really simplified way of putting this. But now let's say we move the line. Often happens, and I'm going to talk about that too. Let's say we move the line to minus 150. Now you see that 60% that Blaze was talking about. So what that means is here, you'd have to win more than 60% of the time betting minus 150s in order to be profitable. That doesn't mean that you can't, but it just means that you need to like remember that. And also, you're betting 100, and I feel like people don't always remember this. You're betting 100 to win $66.67. All of this is tied together. Like they're all inherently related when you're betting things like this. You go to minus 200, and then you see the implied odds are 66.67%. You're betting $100 to win $50. You're betting to win half. And I think that when people are betting, they kind of forget like there still can be value on some of these bets that are like minus 200. I generally am not betting things that are much higher than minus 200, part of the way that I like to manage my bankroll, but I also don't think that it's a bad bet. And one guy that I do a lot of work with at the Action Network, Michael Fiddle, he does great betting these. And then there's another guy on Twitter, Fozen Poker. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but he talks about this a lot when he was betting like the LeBron, 10 points in every game. And, he's got like the meme. It's like, if you saw this much money on the ground, would you pick it up? And there is value on these bets because here, like on a minus 200, if you think that instead of this happening 66.67% of the time, if you have this happening 90% of the time, you should be betting this. I mean, that's a good bet for you then. And I think that that's something that people need to kind of get over a little bit, but it's also about like risk reward. A lot of people are like, well, like if I'm betting $100, like I don't want to only win, like if this was say like a minus 500, I don't want to bet $100 to only win 20. Like if I lose, I lost $100 and I need to win 5 bets in order to then make it back. So that's something that, I think a lot of people struggle with in terms of the math of it, right? Now, I want to talk about a couple things that were said in here. So I think Blaze is like spot on with that. I also tend to think that CLV is a proper measurement of like certain things, right? And I do think that you generally want to be on the right side of the CLV like argument and the CLV analysis, right? So, but it cuts a couple different ways. Because if we're betting early, which a lot of times I try to weigh this for my followers often, where there's some instances where I want to get out of bet early because I'm like, this is just gonna get hammered. Like it's not a good line. And if I don't give it out, somebody else is going to give it out. It's not going to exist. So I like to try to get some of those out. Sometimes, though, there are certain players and certain props or certain bets, right, where I could look at it and go, I don't need to bet that right now. I'm going to bet it closer to tip. And sometimes you do that for a couple different reasons. One of which is like certain lines, especially like sides, totals, are a little bit less volatile, I think, than player props. But they do get hammered in the same way. And it's part of why books, for example, you could bet, say, $100 on a prop the night before, and that might be all you can get down. But closer to tip, you generally are going to be able to bet more because the market has matured more. The sports books have narrowed this line. And that's what Pips was talking about. When he's talking about how sports books are wrong 99% of the time, and they rely on action on both sides to figure out where they need to be. And, you see this actually the most, I think, on exchanges, because exchanges aren't limiting people. They're basically saying, somebody comes in, they say, I'm putting out a bet here, and this is how much I'm putting to back it. Somebody can come and grab that liquidity. That is a better example, I think, or like the best example of saying, I'm originating. I think that this is the right play, and the market will adjust for that, right? Because if nobody wants that bet, then it's just not going to get filled. Whereas with the sports book, they're just putting out these offerings and saying, anybody can bet this. And based on that, they have enough backing behind them, enough money that they can afford to let the market do the correcting for them. When you use an exchange, you're putting a lot more trust in yourself, saying, I think that this line is the proper line, and I'm going to try to bet it here, or I'm going to go fill somebody's order because I think that I have better edge than they do. And it's a little bit more head to head. And it is one thing where, like, I don't think that people should be using, like when you're using some of the odds comparison machines and you say, okay, well, like Profit X or Novig or whatever, or like what, any of those, they have the best line. I do not like the idea of that. Like, I don't think that it's the right way that you should be kind of giving it out, because even if you do think that that's the best line and you want it, right? That's fine. There's only so much liquidity at that number. So you can't even like even if everybody hit buy at the same time, it's not going to work that way. It's not like a sports book. Sports books have to move the line later. But as long as the bet's up there, pretty much everybody can bet it up to their limits or whatever. But on an exchange, if I see a bet that's out there and maybe the liquidity is only $100, it's not like I'm gonna take all of that before it even gets to anybody else. So you can't. I don't really think it's proper to give out those types of lines um especially for a service, like a paid service like I have. I'm never going to do that. I don't think it's fair. I don't think that it's the right way to kind of do business for you guys, because it's not available for you guys either. I think you can use exchanges as a means to get down. I think it's one of the better ways that you can do that. And the fees are obviously better too. So a lot of value in that, but I don't think that it's valuable in terms of me giving out a play for you guys. Now, in terms of getting CLV and this, like, he talks about fake and artificial line movement, I think that is like a good point here, because when there's a lot of people betting a play all at once, or if it's, I would say that's the better way to look at it. When it's a lot of people betting a play all at once, it will simulate somebody that's really sharp taking their max on the book and then the book adjusting for that, because they'll say, what the fuck? Like, we're getting 300 people betting the same bet right now. Like, there's got to be a problem with this line, and they move it. That's what he's saying, but in terms of like fake and artificial line movement. Now, sometimes you will see sharp bettors hit the other side, and then the line will go back to where it was. And I think that that's an interesting point of analysis here, because I think that it happened. It does happen. I think that it also sometimes just never happens because the bet is too niche. Like, there's no real desire to go bet and have exposure on that prop. Or you'd say, well, like, I'm not really seeing an edge one way or the other, even with the artificial line move. Like, I don't want to buy back on that. So you can kind of create CLV by like a storm of people betting something. Generally, though, you do want to be on the right side of the CLV. So, like if I give out a play, or let's say I bet something, and let's say I don't tell anybody about it, and I bet a play, and it's like minus 115. I don't tell anybody about it. I bet like a normal amount. I bet like a unit on it. And then by the time the game tips, a couple hours later, it went from minus 115 to minus 250, or the prop went up or something like that. Generally, that means that, and like let's say it didn't appear anywhere else on like social media, nobody gave it out. It was a bet that kind of went a little bit under the radar, or so to speak, in terms of social media. But I was on the right side of the CLV. I would feel very strongly about my bet, because to me, that would be an indicator of other sharp people betting the same thing, and then the line moved in the way that I expected it to, and I got CLV. So I do think that CLV is a great indicator of, are you making proper bets? But you have to look at it in the way of, it's not because you gave it out that it moved. You want it to move with you because like you're on the right bet, like not because you bet it in particular. I think that's kind of where this issue is kind of coming out, right? Now, this does lead you into another conversation of, if you continually get CLV, that does tend to be something that sportsbooks are going to look at in terms of whether or not they're going to limit you. And I think that that's one of the advantages of saying, well, if I have an edge on this particular bet, like let's say I have an edge of, I don't know, like let's say I have an edge of like 10% on a particular bet. And I'm like, well, it's an opener. I'm probably only going to be able to get down like a quarter of a unit that I would want to get down on this bet. And or maybe it's only available on a very particular book that I can't really bet it on properly, or like I can't get down on it, right? Before you make that edge like public, some of these books obviously use like the same traders, like there's Canby books, etc., right? And if you bet it in one place, then it might affect it like in a cascading way. And then a lot of times these books, like if they don't have a way to look at, sometimes the books like use each other in terms of trying to shape their line, right? So if you're looking at each other and trying to shape a line, like let's say you didn't have, I mean, Bet365 actually usually posts lines first, right? They post lines early a lot of times. DraftKings does too. But like, let's say you're DraftKings and FanDuel, and you're like, I don't know what the price is at. Let's go see what 365 has. They go and they go, oh, all right, like that guy's at like 3 assists. Okay, great. We're just going to price it there too. Now, let's say I took my edge, or like the edge that I thought was going to be there. I bet the fuck out of it on 365, or at least as much as I could. And then 365 starts moving the line. And they go from a 2.5 prop, or like a 1.5 prop, to a 4.5 prop, right? Like I'm using like a little bit of an extreme example. Let's say, because the problem with this is, say like I'm limited on 365, but I'm not limited on FanDuel, for example. Because I burned this edge like early, and I know I got like a ton of CLV on this, right? But like I wasn't able to get anything down. If I had just waited and not taken advantage of it right away, then some of these other books would open up. And if there's the possibility that maybe they piggyback off of that bet or off of that book. And then I get an opportunity to actually get down the amount that I want to get down on this other book. So it's a little bit of a game here where certain bets and certain players, like I don't mind betting it early, because I know that I can get down on it the way that I want to. And I know that the people that are paying me can get down on it the way that they want to, for the most part anyway. Or I think that because the line is going to move so much and it's like too obvious of an edge, that it needs to be bet right away. Other times, though, if it's not super obvious and I want to be able to get down more, like sometimes it's better just wait, see how another book opens up. And then if I'm not seeing any movement on it, like maybe nobody else is has the same perceived edge that I do, by waiting closer to tip, it's less likely to trigger like a CLV move in the same way, because there's less time, the market's matured more, and the sportsbooks are going to feel a little bit more confident about having a bet up there at, if the game starts at 7 o'clock and I'm betting it at 6:50, they're going to feel a little bit more confident about where that bet was than if I was betting it the second that they opened the market. So there's a little bit of a cat and mouse game that you need to kind of consider with your accounts. And then I think it's also important for people that give out picks or sell picks to kind of keep in mind, because ultimately there's two things here. One is that obviously you're not supposed to have more than one account. It's against every term of service. I cannot recommend it, right? At the same time, if you give out a lot of these bets and you have people following you that are just hammering early lines, you're going to limit them. And most people do not have the ability to then get down otherwise. Like, you could be in a state where you only have one sports book. You could be in a state where multiple ones of your sports books are already burned because you use them in a way where you did get limited. Like, you want to be able to bet and make money for an extended period of time, as long as you possibly can. And masking CLV, masking the sharpness of your account, I think is equally as important as just generating good bets off the rip. So, like, for me, if I looked at something and I said, well, my edge right now is 10%, I think I could wait closer to tip and still get maybe an 8% edge and get my full amount in. That can sometimes be more important than that 10% edge right at the open, because I'm in a much, much better position to maintain the health and the integrity of that account and then make more money moving forward. So it's a little bit of like a nuanced conversation here, but I do think that it's something that needs to be said, and it's something that people need to kind of consider when you're betting and you're saying, well, CLV is the most important thing. I do agree. I think that CLV is a great indicator of you being successful, of you being on the right side of these line moves. But I do think that there's a way that you can say, I don't need CLV here in order to still have this edge, and it's going to allow me to keep this out open. Because I think sometimes the out can be much more important than the individual CLV on a particular bet. So that's my talk, and that's my take on CLV, at least for this conversation. For pods and recs, before we get you out of here, I am going to recommend Costco sells flank steak now, and it's like one of the best deals ever. I got it the other day, thought it was fantastic. Went back to Costco, got it again. Really couldn't recommend it more. Comes in like a 2-pack, solid settings, like 3 to 5 pounds or 3 to 4 pounds ish, give or take, in the pack. So it's like 2 meals for like a family. Really, really recommend it. I think it's nice. It's good for tacos, stuff like that. So really was happy with grabbing some flank steaks there. And I am going to recommend also, if you don't have an ugly sweater for Christmas yet, or for your ugly sweater parties, be sure to try to order one soon. I need to order mine, so this is kind of my personal reminder to me to do so. So those are my 2 recommendations. Guys, please like, rate, review, subscribe. Really appreciate it. And again, there's going to be that $1 for the week trial of the huddle down here in the bio. So really appreciate you, and let's continue to cash that.